Millionaire Library.
Let me ask you something honest. When life puts an obstacle in front of you, what's the first thing you feel? Most people feel frustration. Some feel fear. A few feel the quiet electric pull of opportunity. That last group, that small, rare group, they're not smarter than you. They're not luckier. They simply learned to see differently. And that's exactly what this book is about. Not motivating you, not pumping you up with empty phrases you'll forget by tomorrow. This book is about rewiring the way your mind processes the world so that every challenge you face becomes a door, not a wall. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Let's begin. There's a moment that changes everything for certain people. Not a dramatic event, not a sudden windfall. It's quieter than that. It's the moment they realize that life isn't happening to them, it's responding to them, to their thinking, to their decisions, to the invisible architecture of their mind. The moment that realization lands, really lands, everything shifts. And I want that moment to happen for you right here in this first chapter. Strategic thinking is not a personality trait. It's not something you're born with. It's a skill. A learnable, trainable, repeatable skill. And like every skill, it starts with understanding what it actually is, because most people have it completely wrong. When people hear the word strategy, they think chess, they think business plans, spreadsheets, corporate meetings. They imagine something cold and calculated. But real strategic thinking is warmer than that. It's more human. It's the ability to pause before reacting, to zoom out before deciding, to ask better questions before taking action. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most intentional. Think about two people facing the same problem. Let's say a sudden job loss. The first person reacts immediately. Panic, anxiety, frantic applications sent to anyone who will listen, energy scattered in every direction. The second person does something different. They pause. Not because they're calm by nature, but because they've trained themselves to pause. They ask, what does this situation actually require? What assets do I have right now that I haven't fully used? What would this look like in 5 years if I play it correctly? One person is reacting to the present, the other is designing the future. Same situation, two completely different minds at work. That gap, that space between stimulus and response is where strategic thinking lives. And your entire life changes when you learn to live there. Now I want to tell you about a man named Daniel. He was 26, working a mid-level marketing job, earning just enough to feel comfortable, but not enough to feel free. He was smart, hardworking. Everyone around him said he had potential. But potential is a word people use when they don't know what to do with their talent yet. Daniel had a plan, technically. Work hard, get promoted, save a little, hope for the best. But that's not a plan. That's a wish dressed up in professional clothes. One evening, his company announced layoffs. Daniel was let go. He drove home in silence. And that night, instead of sending out resumes or calling his friends to vent, he did something unusual. He took out a notebook and wrote at the top of the page, "What is this situation actually giving me?" He stared at that question for a long time. Then the answers started coming. Time, clarity, permission to start over, a forced exit from comfort. Within 8 months, Daniel had built a small consulting practice using skills he'd been giving away for free to his employer for 3 years. He didn't get lucky, he got strategic. The crisis didn't break him, it became his opening move. Here's the first principle I want you to carry through this entire book. Every situation has two faces. One face is obvious, the problem, the loss, the difficulty. The other face is hidden, the leverage, the lesson, the opportunity. Strategic thinkers have trained themselves to look for the second face before they react to the first. That's it. That's the habit. Simple, but not easy. And like every powerful habit, it compounds over time. Now I want to ask you something directly. Think about a challenge you're facing right now. Doesn't matter how big or small, a financial pressure, a relationship that feels stuck, a career path that's unclear, a goal that keeps moving further away. Hold it in your mind for a moment. Good. Now ask yourself, have I only been looking at the first face? Have I only been focused on the problem itself rather than what the problem might be trying to show me? I'm not asking you to be naive. Problems are real. Pain is real. But the angle from which you view that pain determines everything. What you feel, what you decide, and ultimately where you end up. Strategic thinking begins with perspective architecture. This is the practice of deliberately choosing the mental angle from which you assess your reality. Most people absorb reality passively. It hits them and they respond. Strategic thinkers construct how they see reality before reality arrives. They have frameworks already installed, mental filters that transform raw experience into useful information. One of the most powerful frameworks is what I call the outcome ladder. When you face any situation, you ask yourself 3 ascending questions. First, what is the immediate outcome of this situation? Second, what is the medium-term outcome if I respond thoughtfully? Third, what is the long-term compound outcome if I turn this into a pattern of thinking? Most people only ask the first question. They live entirely in the immediate. Strategic thinkers climb all 3 rungs before they act. Take something as common as a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Immediate outcome of avoiding it, you feel relief today. Medium term, tension builds, the situation worsens, trust erodes. Long-term compound, you become someone who avoids hard conversations. Someone who avoids hard conversations limits every relationship, every negotiation, every partnership you'll ever have. Now reverse it. Immediate outcome of having the conversation, temporary discomfort. Medium term, clarity, resolution, respect. Long term, you become someone people trust, someone who can navigate complexity, someone whose word carries weight. One decision, 3 completely different timelines. The outcome ladder doesn't make decisions for you. It shows you what you're actually choosing between. This is what separates people who seem to always make the right moves from those who constantly feel stuck. It's rarely intelligence, it's rarely talent. It's the habit of thinking one level deeper than the moment. That one extra level is where all the power lives. I want to leave you with this as we close the first chapter. Strategic thinking is not a destination. It's a practice. It's a daily discipline of choosing intention over impulse, clarity over chaos, design over drift. You don't become a strategic thinker in a week, but you can begin today in the next decision you make, no matter how small. The quality of your life is determined not by what happens to you, but by the quality of thinking you bring to what happens to you. That's not poetry, that's physics. Start small, start now. The mind you build today is the life you'll live tomorrow.
Chapter 2. The Chess Player's Advantage. Thinking 3 moves ahead while everyone else reacts. Most people play checkers with their life. They see what's directly in front of them. They make a move, and then they wait to see what happens. Then they react to that. Then they wait again. Their entire existence is a series of reactions dressed up as decisions. But there's a different way to play. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The chess player doesn't wait for the board to dictate the game. The chess player reads the board, anticipates the opponent, and plans several moves ahead, all before touching a single piece. That capacity, that forward projection of thought, is one of the most valuable cognitive abilities a human being can develop. And the beautiful thing is this: most of your competition isn't doing it, which means the moment you start, you already have an edge. Let's talk about what it actually means to think ahead, not in theory, in practice, in the real texture of daily life. There's a woman named Sophia, 29 years old, working in sales at a growing tech startup. She was good at her job, consistently hitting her numbers, respected by her team, liked by her manager. But she was also invisible in one crucial way. She was executing tasks. She was not thinking about the game beneath the game. One afternoon, her company announced it was entering a new market, healthcare. Most of her colleagues shrugged. New market, new quota, more work. Sophia did something different.
That evening, she spent 2 hours researching healthcare regulations, key players, and the specific pain points of hospital procurement teams. She didn't wait to be trained. She didn't wait to be told it mattered. She saw 3 moves ahead. She understood that whoever became fluent in that new market first would become indispensable. 6 months later, she closed the company's first 2 major healthcare accounts. A year later, she was leading the healthcare division. She didn't get promoted because she worked harder than everyone else. She got promoted because she thought further than everyone else. That's the chess player's advantage. Seeing what others haven't noticed yet, acting on it before it becomes obvious. Now, here's the mechanism behind this. The human brain, by default, is wired for the immediate. This was useful 40,000 years ago when the threat was a predator right in front of you. But in modern life, the most dangerous predators are invisible. They're slow-moving, missed opportunities, compounding bad habits, relationships slowly decaying from neglect, careers plateauing from intellectual stagnation. These don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, years after the decisions that invited them. Strategic thinkers have learned to override the brain's default short-term bias, not through willpower, through systems, through questions they ask themselves so regularly that forward thinking becomes automatic. Here's a question I want you to start using immediately. After every significant decision you're about to make, pause and ask, if this becomes my permanent pattern, where does it lead? Not just what does this decision do today? Where does it lead if this becomes the way I always operate? That question alone will filter out an enormous amount of poor choices. Because most bad decisions don't look bad in the moment. They look convenient. They look comfortable. They look like the easy thing. The damage only appears downstream when the pattern has already compounded. Think about something as ordinary as how you spend your evenings. One evening of passive scrolling is nothing. It affects nothing. But what if that becomes your pattern every evening for the next 5 years? What skills weren't built? What books weren't read? What projects weren't started? What relationships weren't deepened? Now flip it. One evening of focused reading or deliberate learning is nothing in isolation too. But as a pattern, in 5 years, you will have consumed the equivalent of a graduate education in whatever subject you chose. Same amount of time, entirely different life. The chess player sees the pattern. The reactive person only sees the evening. This brings us to what I call the 3-layer view. When you're evaluating any situation, a business opportunity, a relationship, a financial decision, a career pivot, you need to see it on 3 layers simultaneously. Layer 1 is the surface layer. What's visible, what's immediate, what's obvious. Most people live entirely here. Layer 2 is the structural layer. What systems, incentives, or patterns are underneath this situation? Who benefits? What's the actual mechanism at work? Layer 3 is the trajectory layer. If nothing changes, where is this going in 2 years? In 5? Thinking on all 3 layers at once gives you a 3-dimensional map of reality, while everyone else is reading a flat picture. Let me show you how this works in a real context. Say you're considering a job offer. On the surface layer, the salary's good, the title is better, the office is nice. Most people stop there and say yes. Now go to the structural layer. What's the actual culture of this company? Is the industry growing or contracting? Does this role build transferable skills or narrow them? Who is your manager, and are they someone who will develop you or someone who will use you? Now the trajectory layer. In 3 years, if you take this role, what does your resume say? What have you learned? Who do you know? What options have opened or closed? That full 3-layer analysis takes maybe 45 minutes of honest thought, and it could be worth years of your life. That's not dramatic. That's math. Now, I want you to ask something, and I want you to actually sit with it. Where in your life right now are you playing checkers instead of chess? Where are you reacting instead of anticipating? Where are you so focused on the immediate move that you've stopped seeing the board? Take a moment. Be honest. This isn't about judgment. This is about clarity. Because you can't change what you won't see. One of the most underrated components of thinking ahead is what strategists call second-order consequences. Every decision has first-order consequences, the obvious, direct result. But it also has second-order consequences, what happens because of what happens. And often, the second-order consequence is the one that matters most. Here's a clean example. A young entrepreneur decides to take on a large client, even though the project is slightly outside his current capabilities. First-order consequence, more revenue coming in. Second-order consequences, the team is stretched thin, quality on existing projects drops, reputation takes a subtle hit, 2 smaller clients quietly leave. The revenue from the big client barely covers what was lost, and the brand took damage that takes years to repair. He only saw one move. The board punished him for it. This isn't hypothetical. This is how most small businesses stall and how most promising careers plateau. Not from lack of effort, from lack of second-order thinking. The antidote is simple to describe and requires practice to build. Before any significant decision, write down what are the likely second and third-order effects of this choice. Not just what happens next, what happens because of what happens next. Give yourself 10 minutes. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be more thorough than your instinct alone allows. There's another element of chess that translates perfectly into life strategy: controlling the center. In chess, whoever controls the center of the board controls the game. They have the most options, the most mobility, the most power. In life, the equivalent of controlling the center is building optionality, having choices, creating a position from which you can move in multiple directions based on how the situation evolves. Financially, this looks like having savings, not just income. Professionally, this looks like having marketable skills, not just a job. Relationally, this looks like having a diverse network, not just a single dependency. The goal of strategic living is not to predict the future. It's to put yourself in a position where you can respond to the future from strength rather than from need. And here's what I want you to remember as we close this chapter. The chess player doesn't always know exactly how the game will unfold. They don't have a crystal ball. They have something better. They have a trained mind that stays calm, reads the board continuously, and adjusts with intelligence rather than panic. You don't need to predict every outcome. You need to cultivate the kind of mind that navigates uncertainty well. That mind is built move by move, decision by decision, one intentional thought at a time. You're already building it. Keep going.
Chapter 3: The Architecture of Decisions. Why Smart People Make Bad Choices and How to Stop It. You've met them. Brilliant people making terrible decisions. Educated, talented, hard-working people who somehow keep ending up in the same traps, the same cycles, the same frustrations, just with different scenery. And maybe, in quiet moments, you've wondered if you're one of them. That question alone shows more self-awareness than most people will ever develop. So let's answer it. Let's go inside the decision-making process and understand exactly what's happening and how to make it work for you instead of against you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Intelligence doesn't protect you from bad decisions. In fact, high intelligence can make you worse at deciding, because smart people are exceptionally good at building convincing arguments for what they already want to do. They rationalize brilliantly. They justify elegantly. They construct logical-sounding reasons for emotionally driven choices, and then they call it reasoning. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it motivated reasoning, and it's everywhere. In boardrooms, in relationships, in financial decisions, in career choices. The mind finds what it's looking for, and if it wants a certain outcome badly enough, it will construct a path to justify it, regardless of whether that path leads somewhere good. The first step to better decisions is recognizing this mechanism in yourself, not in others, in yourself, because it's easy to see motivated reasoning in someone else's bad choices. It's almost invisible in your own. The way you catch it is through a single disruptive question.
Am I reasoning toward what's true or toward what I want to be true? That question is uncomfortable. It should be. Discomfort is often the first signal that you're getting close to something real. Let me tell you about Marcus, 32 years old, financial analyst, sharp mind, good instincts. He had been offered a partnership opportunity in a friend's business. The business was in an industry Marcus knew nothing about. The financials were unclear, the timeline was aggressive, but his friend was charismatic and the pitch was exciting, and Marcus wanted it to work. So he did what smart people do. He researched selectively. He found the evidence that supported the opportunity and quietly minimized the evidence that didn't. He invested a significant amount. 18 months later, the business had collapsed. When Marcus looked back, the warning signs had been there from the beginning. He hadn't missed them. He had dismissed them because they were inconvenient to what he already wanted to believe. That's not stupidity. That's motivated reasoning, and it has cost people far more than money. So, how do you build a decision architecture that protects you from your own blind spots? You start with structure, because structure removes the moment of decision from the emotional state you're in when the decision arrives. Let me give you 3 specific tools. The first is what I call the separation test. Before making any significant decision, separate the decision from the moment. Give yourself a defined waiting period, 24 hours for medium decisions, 1 week for major ones. Not to stall, not to overthink, but to let the emotional charge of the moment dissipate enough that you can hear yourself think clearly. Most impulse decisions feel urgent. That urgency is almost always manufactured by the other party, by your own excitement, or by your fear of missing out. Real opportunities don't evaporate in 24 hours, and if one does, it likely wasn't as solid as it appeared. The second tool is the reversal test. Once you've made a tentative decision, argue the other side with full commitment, not weakly, not half-heartedly. Argue it as if your job is to destroy your own position. Find every legitimate reason why the decision could be wrong. What are you assuming that might not be true? What would have to be false for this to fail? What are you not looking at because it's uncomfortable? This isn't about becoming indecisive. It's about making sure your decision can survive honest pressure before it has to survive real-world pressure. The third tool is the trusted dissenter. Find one person in your life, just one, who you give explicit permission to disagree with you without social consequence. Someone whose judgment you respect, who has no stake in your decision, and who will tell you what they actually think rather than what you want to hear. This person is rare and valuable. Protect that relationship. Use it selectively for decisions that genuinely matter. And when they push back, don't defend. Listen first. Ask questions. Understand their concern fully before you respond. The instinct to immediately defend your position is the exact moment where ego overrides wisdom. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in conversations about decision-making. The decisions you're not making, because inaction is a decision. Staying in a job that's draining you is a decision. Avoiding a difficult conversation is a decision. Keeping money in a low-yield account because you haven't gotten around to learning alternatives is a decision. These passive decisions accumulate silently. They don't feel like choices because nothing actively happened, but the outcome is just as real and often far more costly than any active choice you might make. Strategic thinkers audit their inaction with the same rigor they apply to their actions. They ask regularly, what am I not deciding that is deciding my future for me? I want you to think about that right now. What is one area of your life where you've been in a quiet holding pattern, where you've been telling yourself you'll figure it out eventually, you'll deal with it when the time is right, you'll start when things settle down? What has that non-decision been costing you in time, in energy, in compound interest on missed opportunity? You don't have to solve it right now, but you have to see it clearly, because you cannot navigate around an obstacle you refuse to acknowledge. There's another dimension of decision architecture that most people overlook completely: the environment in which decisions are made. Your decisions are not made in a vacuum. They're made inside a context: your emotional state, your energy level, the people around you, and the information you've most recently consumed. And all of those factors shape the decision before your conscious mind even enters the room. Research in behavioral psychology has shown consistently that people make measurably different choices depending on whether they're tired or rested, hungry or fed, anxious or calm. These aren't small variations, they're significant shifts in risk tolerance, patience, and clarity. This means that one of the most powerful things you can do for your decision quality has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with timing. Never make a major decision when you're emotionally flooded. Never commit to something significant when you're exhausted. Never negotiate from a position of anxiety if you can delay by even a few hours. Protect your decision-making environment the way a surgeon protects a sterile field. The conditions matter as much as the technique. There's a principle I call decision hygiene. Just as physical hygiene is a daily practice that prevents disease, decision hygiene is a set of daily practices that prevent poor choices from accumulating. It includes things like maintaining enough sleep that your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for judgment, is actually functioning. Limiting the number of significant decisions you make in a single day, because decision fatigue is real and measurable. Creating default rules for recurring low-stakes choices so your mental energy is preserved for decisions that genuinely require your full attention. And regularly reviewing past decisions, not to criticize yourself, but to identify patterns in your thinking that are serving you and patterns that aren't. That last practice is underused and extraordinarily powerful. Keep a simple decision journal, not elaborate, not time-consuming, just a brief record of significant decisions you made, the reasoning behind them, and the outcomes over time. When you review that journal months later, patterns emerge that are invisible in the moment. You start to see where your reasoning is consistently strong and where it's consistently compromised. You start to catch your own blind spots before they catch you. That journal is one of the most honest mirrors you will ever hold up to yourself. Here's what I want you to walk away with from this chapter. Decisions are not moments, they are systems. They are the product of your mental state, your environment, your information quality, your emotional filters, and the habits of thought you've built over years. Improving your decisions isn't about trying harder in the moment. It's about building better conditions, better structures, and better habits long before the moment arrives. The people who consistently make good choices aren't luckier than you. They've simply built a better architecture around how they think. And architecture, unlike talent, can be designed. Start designing yours.
There's a reason some people seem to move through life at a completely different speed. They build faster, they earn more, they seem to accomplish in 1 year what takes others 5. And when you look closely, when you really study the mechanism behind their progress, it almost never comes down to working harder. It comes down to something else entirely. It comes down to leverage. Understanding leverage is one of the most important intellectual shifts you will ever make, and most people never make it. Archimedes said it more than 2,000 years ago. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. He was talking about physics, but he was also describing the fundamental principle behind every significant achievement in human history. You don't need unlimited force, you need the right placement, the right tool, the right angle. Applied correctly, a small input produces a massive output. That's leverage, and it's available to you right now in every area of your life. Let's start with the most misunderstood form of leverage, time. Most people treat time as the primary resource. They trade it directly for money, for results, for progress. An hour in equals an hour out. But that's not leverage, that's labor. Leverage over time means finding ways to make your hours produce results that continue beyond the hour itself. A conversation that changes someone's trajectory, yours or theirs, is leverage. A skill you learn once and apply thousands of times is leverage. A system you build that operates without your constant presence is leverage.
A piece of content, a tool, a relationship, a reputation, anything that keeps producing value after the initial investment of effort, that is time leverage. Think about the difference between a doctor who trades hours for income and a doctor who writes a book about their methodology. The first earns while they work and stops when they stop. The second earns from a book that exists independently of their presence. Same knowledge, completely different leverage ratio. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to write a book. I'm saying that the question to ask constantly is, how can I make this work without me? How can I ensure that what I do today produces value not just today, but tomorrow, next month, next year? Let me tell you about a young man named Jerome. He was 24, working in digital marketing, earning a decent salary, ambitious, but frustrated by how slow everything felt. He was working long hours and seeing incremental results. He was in the labor trap. More input, marginally more output. One afternoon, he made a small but decisive shift. Instead of doing client work himself every single time, he started documenting his processes. Every strategy he used, every system that worked, every template, every framework, he wrote it down with enough clarity that someone else could execute it. Within 6 months, he had a documented operating system for his work. He hired a part-time assistant, then a second. His output tripled without his hours increasing. His income followed. He hadn't worked harder. He had installed leverage. Jerome didn't stumble onto some secret. He simply started asking a different question. How do I make this work without me? That question is one of the most liberating questions you can ask, and it applies far beyond business. In relationships, leverage looks like investing deeply in a small number of high-quality connections rather than spreading attention thin across hundreds of surface-level ones. One mentor with genuine interest in your growth is worth more than 50 acquaintances who vaguely wish you well. One trusted colleague who opens doors for you creates more opportunity than 1,000 LinkedIn connections who don't know your work. Depth is leverage. Breadth is noise. In learning, leverage looks like identifying the 20% of knowledge in any domain that produces 80% of the results and mastering that before anything else. Most people learn by accumulation. They gather information endlessly and apply it sporadically. Strategic learners identify the highest leverage concepts first, build deep fluency there, and let everything else flow from that foundation. If you're learning about investing, the highest leverage concept isn't a specific stock tip. It's understanding compounding. If you're learning about communication, it's not memorizing scripts. It's understanding emotional dynamics. Start with the root. The branches grow from there. In finances, leverage is perhaps most literal and most misunderstood. Financial leverage, used wisely, means deploying capital in a way that generates returns beyond the initial amount. A rental property that produces monthly income from a single purchase is leverage. A business built on systems and team that operates without your daily involvement is leverage. Equity in a growing company is leverage. These aren't exotic or inaccessible ideas, they're patterns, and patterns can be learned, adapted, and applied at almost any starting point. The key insight is this: wealthy people don't just earn more, they earn differently. They structure their efforts so that money and assets work alongside them rather than waiting passively for the next paycheck. Now I want to ask you something directly. Where in your life right now are you working in straight labor mode? Input equals output, hour for hour, effort for result, when you could be building leverage instead. It might be a skill you keep using manually that you could systematize. It might be knowledge you have that you could teach, document, or package. It might be a relationship you've been meaning to invest in more deeply but keep postponing. It might be a financial habit that's keeping your money static when it could be working. Sit with that question. The answer is usually closer than you think. There's a form of leverage that almost nobody talks about and almost everybody underestimates: reputation. Your reputation is a form of stored social capital. It's the accumulation of every interaction, every delivered promise, every moment of integrity or its absence, compressed into how people think and speak about you when you're not in the room. A strong reputation is extraordinary leverage. It opens doors before you knock. It creates trust before you've spoken. It attracts opportunities that never had to be chased. And here's the remarkable thing about reputation as leverage. It compounds. Every time you do what you said you would do, on time and with quality, the compound interest on your reputation grows. Every time you cut a corner or overpromise and underdeliver, you make a withdrawal that costs more than the deposit that built it. Reputation is built in small moments, not in grand gestures. The email you respond to thoughtfully when you could have been vague, the commitment you honor when it would have been easy to make an excuse, the credit you give to someone else when you could have taken it. These are not soft or sentimental ideas. They are strategic investments in a form of leverage that no market can crash and no competitor can copy. Your reputation is yours alone. Build it with the same intentionality you'd bring to any other serious investment. Let's talk about one more form of leverage that is available to every single person reading this right now, regardless of age, income, or circumstance: the leverage of skill stacking. This concept is simple and powerful. Instead of trying to become the absolute best in the world at one thing, which is extraordinarily difficult, you combine a set of skills that are each individually good, but together create something rare. A person who is a solid communicator, a competent data analyst, and a clear strategic thinker is not just three things. They're something most organizations desperately need and rarely find. Each skill alone is common enough. The combination is exceptional. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, described this principle clearly in his own career. He wasn't the funniest person in the world, he wasn't the best artist, he wasn't the deepest business thinker, but he was good at all three, and that specific combination made him uniquely positioned to create something no one else made. You don't need to be extraordinary at one thing. You need to be genuinely competent at several things that together create unusual value. Think about what your current skill stack looks like. What do you have? What could you add that would create a combination the market finds rare and valuable? That's not a random question. That's a strategic one. Answer it seriously. As we close this chapter, here's the central idea I want embedded in your thinking. Leverage is not a shortcut. It is not laziness dressed up in sophisticated language. It is the intelligent application of effort, placing your energy at the points where it multiplies rather than simply accumulate. The goal is not to do less. The goal is to think more carefully where your effort lands. Because effort placed at the right leverage point doesn't just produce a result, it produces a result that keeps producing. That's the difference between building a life and simply living one. Start looking for your leverage points. They're already there. You just have to train yourself to see them.
Here is something the modern world will never tell you. Speed is not the advantage you think it is. We live inside a culture that worships urgency, fast results, instant feedback, overnight success, the dopamine loop of constant movement. And inside that culture, patience has been quietly rebranded as weakness, as passivity, as the thing people settle for when they can't make things happen fast enough. But that rebranding is one of the most expensive lies ever sold to ambitious people. Because patience, used strategically, is not waiting. It is one of the most aggressive and powerful moves available to a thinking person. Let me say that again in a different way. There is a profound difference between passive waiting and strategic patience. Passive waiting is what happens when you have no plan, no direction, and no agency. You're simply hoping time will resolve something you haven't addressed. That's not patience. That's avoidance wearing patience's clothes. Strategic patience is something else entirely. It's the deliberate decision to not act yet, because you've assessed the situation, you understand the timing, and you recognize that the moment hasn't arrived. You're not idle. You're positioned. You're prepared. You're watching. And when the moment comes, you move with a precision that looks effortless to everyone watching, but required everything to develop. Think about how music actually works. Not just the notes, the silence between them.
Any trained musician will tell you that the rests, the pauses, the empty spaces in a composition are not absences of music. They are music. They give the notes their weight, their contrast, their meaning. A piece played without silence is just noise. Life works the same way. The periods of patience, the seasons where nothing seems to be happening on the surface, are not empty. They are structural. They are where depth is built, where clarity arrives, where the foundation is laid for everything that follows. The problem is that most people abandon the rest before the next note arrives. Let me introduce you to a concept I call the maturation gap. Every significant outcome in life has a maturation gap, a period between the planting and the harvest where nothing visible is happening but everything essential is developing underground. Entrepreneurs experience it in the early months of a business when effort is high and results are invisible. Athletes experience it in the years of training before performance peaks. Investors experience it in the years before compounding becomes visible. Students experience it before mastery arrives. The maturation gap is universal, and it is precisely where most people quit. Not because they lack talent, not because their direction is wrong, but because they cannot tolerate the silence. They interpret absence of immediate result as evidence of failure, and they walk away from the harvest 3 weeks before it arrives. I want to tell you about a woman named Priya. She spent 4 years building a business in the wellness space. 4 years of content, community building, product development, client work. For most of those 4 years, growth was slow. Encouraging, but slow. Her peers who had started businesses around the same time seemed to be moving faster. Some were making noise on social media. Some had raised funding. Some seemed to have cracked a code she hadn't found yet. In her 3rd year, she had a genuine crisis of confidence. She questioned everything: her direction, her pace, her choices. She sat with that doubt for weeks. And then she did something quietly decisive. She recommitted. Not loudly, not with a dramatic announcement. She simply decided that she was going to trust the compounding of her consistent effort and stay the course. In her 4th year, everything shifted. The community she had slowly built reached a critical mass. Word of mouth accelerated. Revenue grew by 300% in 12 months. What looked like slow progress for 3 years was actually compressed energy waiting to release. Priya didn't succeed despite her patience. She succeeded because of it. Now, let's get practical, because strategic patience is not just a mindset, it's a set of specific behaviors and skills that can be developed. The first is what I call signal reading. Strategic patience doesn't mean ignoring feedback. It means distinguishing between signals that require you to adjust course and noise that simply requires you to stay the course. Not every slow period is a sign you're doing something wrong. Not every challenge is a signal to pivot, but some of them are. The skill is in reading the difference. A useful question: is this difficulty telling me I'm on the wrong path, or is it telling me I'm on the right path and it's simply hard? Those require completely different responses. One calls for recalibration. The other calls for endurance. Confusing the two is one of the most common and costly strategic errors a person can make. The second skill is managing the emotional weight of uncertainty. Patience is difficult not because it's intellectually hard to understand, but because emotionally it's brutal. The human mind does not like open loops. It doesn't like unresolved situations. It generates anxiety in the presence of ambiguity and constantly pushes for resolution, any resolution, just to close the loop. This is why people make premature decisions, not because the timing is right, but because the discomfort of waiting has become unbearable. Strategic thinkers learn to sit inside uncertainty without being controlled by it. They develop what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience discomfort without immediately acting to eliminate it. This isn't suppression, it's capacity, and like all capacities, it grows with practice. Every time you choose to stay present with an unresolved situation and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, you expand that capacity slightly. Over time, you become someone who can hold complexity without collapsing under it. Here's a question worth asking yourself right now. Where in your life are you currently rushing something that would be stronger if allowed to develop at its natural pace? A relationship you're pushing towards definition before it's ready? A business decision you're forcing because the uncertainty is uncomfortable? A creative project you're abandoning because early results are underwhelming? A financial move you're making out of anxiety rather than strategy? Identify it. Name it. Because naming it gives you the option of choosing differently. There's another dimension of patience that has particular relevance for ambitious people: patience with other people. We talk a lot about patience in relation to our own goals and timelines, but strategic patience also applies to how you navigate relationships, negotiations, and influence. Rushing someone rarely works. Pressuring someone into agreement creates compliance without conviction, and compliance without conviction always collapses eventually. The most effective communicators, negotiators, and leaders understand that people move at their own pace, and the attempt to accelerate that pace artificially usually produces resistance rather than progress. Real influence is patient. It plants seeds, it creates conditions, it asks good questions and then allows space for answers to arrive. It doesn't push, it attracts. This connects to something I think about often in the context of ambition. There is a version of ambition that is driven by anxiety, by fear of falling behind, by comparison to others, by a desperate need to prove something as quickly as possible. And there is a version of ambition driven by vision, by a clear sense of where you're going, genuine excitement about the journey, and enough self-trust to move at a pace that's sustainable and sound. The first version produces frantic energy. It makes poor decisions. It burns people out. It builds things quickly and watches them collapse just as fast. The second version is quieter, more deliberate, less impressive in the short term, but in the long term, it builds things that last. I want to speak directly to you for a moment. If you're in a season right now where things feel slow, where your effort seems disproportionate to your visible results, I want you to consider the possibility that you are inside a maturation gap, that the work you're doing is developing something real, something that simply hasn't surfaced yet. I'm not asking you to be naive. I'm not asking you to ignore genuine signals that something needs to change. I'm asking you to honestly audit whether the frustration you're feeling is evidence of a wrong direction or simply evidence of the gap between planting and harvest. Because those two things feel identical from the inside, and your response to them could not be more different. Strategic patience is ultimately an act of faith, not blind faith, but evidence-based faith. Faith that consistent quality compounds, faith that depth eventually surfaces, faith that the work being done in the quiet seasons is just as real as the work being celebrated in the visible ones. The most successful people I've studied across every domain share this quality. Not talent alone, not opportunity alone, the capacity to keep going with clarity and composure when the results haven't arrived yet. That capacity is available to you. It doesn't require special circumstances. It requires a decision. And decisions, as we've already established, are within your architecture to make. Be patient, not as a consolation, as a strategy.
Every major company in the world has a board of directors, a group of experienced, diverse, strategically selected minds whose job is to challenge assumptions, provide perspective, prevent blind spots, and ensure that the decisions made at the top are sound. No serious organization relies on a single mind for its most critical choices, and yet most people navigate the most important decisions of their lives, financial, relational, professional, personal, with no board at all. Just their own thoughts, their own fears, their own limited vantage point, and whatever advice happens to drift in from whoever is closest to them at the time. That's not strategy, that's improvisation, and the cost of improvising your life is enormous. This chapter is about building what I call your inner board of directors, not a literal group of people who meet in a conference room, something more sophisticated and more accessible than that. A mental council, a carefully curated set of perspectives, voices, and frameworks that you carry internally and consult deliberately when it matters most. Some of these council members will be living people in your life. Some will be mentors you've never met. Some will be historical figures whose thinking has been so thoroughly documented that you can reconstruct their perspective with remarkable accuracy. The composition of your inner board is one of the most consequential design decisions you'll ever make, because the voices you internalize become the voices that speak when pressure arrives and time is short. Let's start with the living members. The people currently in your life who belong on your inner board are not necessarily the people closest to you emotionally. They are the people who possess qualities of thinking that you respect, that complement your own tendencies, and that challenge you productively. A good board member is someone who will tell you what they actually see rather than what you want to hear. Someone whose judgment has been tested by real experience, not just theoretical knowledge. Someone who has skin in the game of their own domain, meaning they've made real decisions with real consequences and learned from both outcomes. And critically, someone who has your genuine best interest at heart rather than a stake in any particular outcome you might choose. Think about who in your current life fits that description. You may find the list is shorter than you expected. That's not a failure. That's information. It tells you something important about where to direct your social investment going forward. Because building a meaningful inner board is not passive. It requires you to seek out, develop, and maintain relationships with people whose thinking genuinely elevates yours. That takes time. It takes reciprocity. It takes showing up for people before you need something from them. But the compound return on that investment is extraordinary. Now let me tell you about the non-living members, because some of the most powerful voices on your inner board can belong to people you've never met and never will. History is full of extraordinary thinkers whose minds have been documented with enough depth and precision that you can genuinely absorb their thinking patterns and apply them to your own situation. Marcus Aurelius on resilience and perspective, Warren Buffett on patience, value, and the long game, Maya Angelou on dignity, language, and navigating adversity, Charlie Munger on mental models and avoiding stupidity. Each of these figures represents a distinct mode of thinking, a distinct set of questions, a distinct lens through which to examine a problem. When you've read their work deeply, not just their quotes, their actual thinking, you begin to internalize their perspective well enough to ask, what would this person notice that I'm missing right now? This is not a superficial exercise, it's a genuine cognitive tool. When you're facing a difficult financial decision and you pause to ask what a disciplined long-term thinker like Buffett would see in this situation, you're not just recalling a quote, you're temporarily adopting a different cognitive framework. You're asking different questions, you're applying different filters, and often the answer that emerges is qualitatively different from your default thinking would have produced. Your inner board, used this way, becomes a set of mental lenses, each one showing you a different dimension of the same situation. Let me give you a practical structure for how this actually works. Imagine you're facing a significant career decision. You've been offered a role at a new company. The compensation is better, the brand is prestigious, but something feels uncertain. You can't quite name it. Here's how your inner board earns its seat at the table. Your risk-aware member asks, what are the hidden costs of this move that aren't visible in the offer letter? Your long-term thinker asks, in 5 years, which decision will I wish I had made? Your values-driven member asks, does this role align with the kind of work that genuinely engages me, or am I chasing status? Your devil's advocate asks, what's the best argument against taking this role, and is it strong enough to matter? Your emotionally intelligent member asks, what is the feeling I can't name trying to tell me? Each question comes from a different angle. Together, they produce a more complete picture than any single perspective could provide. That picture doesn't make the decision for you, but it gives you far better material to decide with. Here's something I want you to think about seriously. Most people's inner boards are dominated by voices of fear and limitation, not because they chose those voices deliberately, but because fear is loud, repetitive, and persistent, and it got there first. The voice that says you're not ready, the voice that says it's too risky, the voice that says people like you don't do things like that. These voices often sound like wisdom. They use the language of caution and practicality, but they are not wisdom. They are accumulated anxiety wearing wisdom's clothes. Part of building a strategic inner board is actively auditing and replacing those voices.
not suppressing them entirely. Fear has legitimate information sometimes, but ensuring they don't hold a controlling vote. Ensuring that alongside the cautious voice, there are also clear, experienced, forward-looking voices that have navigated uncertainty and come out stronger. I want to pause here and ask you something personal. Whose voice currently dominates your internal decision-making? When you face a hard choice, whose perspective automatically arrives first? Is it someone who expanded their life through courage and strategic thought, or is it someone whose primary frame is risk avoidance and staying safe? There's no judgment in that question, only information. But the information matters enormously because those default voices are shaping your life every single day, mostly below the level of your conscious awareness. There's another member of the inner board that almost no one includes, but everyone needs: the future self. This is the version of you that exists 10 years from now, the person you are actively becoming through every choice you make today. Consulting your future self is a powerful reality check mechanism. When you're facing a short-term gain that compromises a long-term value, your future self has a clear opinion. When you're about to make a decision driven by ego rather than strategy, your future self can see the outcome more clearly than your present self can. The question to ask is simple and clarifying. Will the person I'm becoming be proud of this decision, or will they have to work around it? That question cuts through a remarkable amount of noise. The future self board member is also valuable in the opposite direction. When fear or self-doubt is driving you towards playing small, towards choosing the safe option over the meaningful one, your future self can provide a different kind of pressure. The regret of inaction is often more painful and more durable than the discomfort of a risk taken and failed. Your future self knows this with a clarity that your present self cannot fully access. So consult them. Give them a seat at the table. Let them speak. Let's talk now about how to actually use your inner board in practice, because knowing it exists is not enough. You need a ritual, a moment of genuine consultation rather than impulsive decision followed by retrospective justification. My recommendation is simple. Before any significant decision, financial, relational, strategic, take 15 minutes and write. Not a pros and cons list, a dialogue. Write the question you're facing at the top of the page. Then, one by one, give each board member a voice. Write their perspective in their voice as you understand it. Be honest. Don't let yourself write what you want them to say. Write what they would actually say, given their values and their thinking patterns. You will be surprised by what emerges when you genuinely inhabit a perspective other than your own. The dialogue itself generates insight that doesn't exist in your default thinking. As we close this chapter, I want to offer you a final image. Think of your inner board not as a constraint, but as an expansion. Every new voice you add with genuine depth is a new dimension of intelligence you carry with you permanently. You become, over time, a mind that can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, that can see a situation from multiple angles before committing to a course of action. That capacity is rare. It is disarming in negotiation, clarifying in crisis, generative in creativity, and steadying in uncertainty. It doesn't happen accidentally. It is built, deliberately, one carefully chosen voice at a time. Start building yours. The seat at the head of that table is always yours, but the quality of the counsel determines the quality of the decisions made there.
Let's start with something most people are never told directly. Your relationship with money is not primarily financial, it's psychological. The numbers in your bank account, the income you earn, the assets you build or fail to build, these are outputs. They are the visible result of an invisible system operating beneath the surface. That system is your money mindset. The beliefs you carry about wealth, the emotions you associate with it, the stories you inherited about what money means and who deserves it and how it's earned and kept. All of that is running quietly in the background, shaping every financial decision you make, often without your awareness. And until you examine that system directly, no amount of financial knowledge will be enough to fundamentally change your results.
This is uncomfortable territory for many people because it requires honesty about beliefs that often feel like facts. The belief that wealthy people are lucky or corrupt, the belief that wanting more money is greedy or superficial, the belief that financial struggle is noble or inevitable given where you come from, the belief that money is complicated and not really something you're built to understand. These aren't neutral observations, they are active instructions to your behavior. They determine what you pursue, what you avoid, what you allow yourself to learn, and how you respond when opportunity arrives. And most of them were installed before you were old enough to examine them critically. Think about the financial environment you grew up in. Not to assign blame, this isn't about blame, but to develop awareness. What did money conversations sound like in your household? Was money discussed openly or treated as a source of tension and secrecy? Were wealthy people admired or resented? Was financial struggle treated as circumstance or as identity? Was saving celebrated or was spending the primary relationship with income? Every answer to those questions left a deposit in your belief system, and that belief system is the lens through which you see every financial decision you face today. You cannot out-earn a destructive money mindset. You can only outgrow it. Let me tell you about two people who started from nearly identical circumstances. Same city, same type of family income, same quality of education. By 40, one had built genuine financial security, investments, owned property, a business with real equity. The other was earning a good salary but living paycheck to paycheck, perpetually feeling like more income would finally solve the problem. The difference wasn't income. At several points in their careers, their incomes were almost identical. The difference was invisible. It was in how each person thought about money. The first person saw money as a tool, something to be directed, deployed, and grown. The second person saw money as a reward, something earned and then spent, a symbol of current success rather than a seed for future security. Same resource, two completely different relationships with it, two completely different outcomes. The wealth mindset is not about obsessing over money. It's not about frugality taken to an extreme or sacrifice dressed up as discipline. It is a specific set of beliefs and habits that, when operating consistently, produce financial growth almost inevitably over time. Let me break down its core components. The first is the producer versus consumer orientation. Most people relate to money primarily as consumers. Income arrives and the primary question is, what can I get with this? The wealth mindset flips the primary question. Before spending, it asks, what can I do with this that will produce more? This doesn't mean never spending on enjoyment or quality of life. It means ensuring that a meaningful portion of every dollar that arrives is directed toward production, toward assets, skills, or tools that generate future value before it's directed toward consumption. The ratio matters, and it's a ratio most people have completely backwards. The second component is understanding the difference between assets and liabilities, not just intellectually, but emotionally. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket over time. A liability is something that takes money out. Most people spend their lives enthusiastically acquiring liabilities while telling themselves they're building wealth. A car purchased on credit is a liability. A wardrobe expanded beyond utility is a liability. A lifestyle inflated to match income rather than allowing the gap between income and spending to widen and invest is a liability architecture. None of this is moral judgment, it's mechanics. The wealth mindset constantly asks, is what I'm acquiring going to produce or consume, and it makes decisions accordingly.
The third component is the relationship with risk. Here, the wealth mindset is subtle and often misunderstood. It is not reckless. It is not about taking big bets with money you cannot afford to lose, but it is also not paralyzed by fear of loss. The wealth mindset understands that calculated risk taken after thorough analysis with defined downside and meaningful upside, is not the opposite of security. It is the path to it. Playing it completely safe with your money doesn't protect you. It guarantees a slow erosion of purchasing power over time.
The person who keeps all their savings in a low-yield account because investing feels risky isn't being cautious. They're accepting a guaranteed small loss to avoid the possibility of a temporary larger one. That's not safety. That's a different kind of risk, one that just moves more slowly and therefore feels less threatening. Now, I want to address something that ambitious young people face with particular intensity: the comparison trap. In a world of visible wealth, social media displaying lifestyles, peers announcing milestones, culture constantly signaling what success looks like, the pressure to match external signals of wealth rather than build actual wealth is enormous. And it destroys more financial futures than almost any other single force. The person buying the luxury car on a payment plan to signal success is not building wealth. They're purchasing the appearance of it while paying interest on the illusion. The person living modestly, investing consistently, building quietly, they look less successful for years, and then one day the compounding becomes visible, and the gap is so large it seems like it happened overnight. It didn't. It happened in the invisible years when no one was watching, and most people were spending their wealth before it had a chance to exist. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How much of your current financial behavior is driven by what you actually want your future to look like versus what you want people to think your present looks like? Be honest, because those two motivations produce completely different financial decisions, and only one of them builds anything real. Here's a concept that changed how I think about wealth accumulation: the gap principle. Wealth is not built by earning more. It's built by widening the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and then directing that gap toward productive assets consistently over time. This sounds simple. It is simple. But simple is not the same as easy, because everything in the modern consumer environment is designed to close that gap the moment it opens. Every lifestyle upgrade, every social pressure, every clever marketing message is aimed at ensuring that as your income rises, your spending rises to match it or exceed it. The wealth mindset is the thing that holds that gap open. It's the discipline to let your lifestyle grow more slowly than your income, to resist the lifestyle inflation that swallows the financial progress of most people the moment they start earning more. There's a practice I want to offer you that is deceptively powerful: a monthly financial audit, not just of numbers, but of beliefs. Once a month, sit with your financial decisions from the past 30 days and ask honestly, which of these decisions came from a wealth-building mindset and which came from scarcity, fear, social pressure, or impulsive emotion. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest enough to see the pattern. Because the pattern, once visible, becomes a choice, and choices, unlike unconscious habits, can be changed. The final element of the wealth mindset I want to address is perhaps the most foundational: the belief that you are capable of building wealth, not abstractly, not theoretically, but personally, specifically, you. Because no financial strategy, no investment vehicle, no opportunity will work for someone who fundamentally does not belong in financial abundance. The subconscious belief that wealth is for other people, people with different backgrounds, different connections, different starting points, is the most expensive belief a person can carry. It causes them to self-sabotage opportunities they consciously want, to make decisions that return them to their financial comfort zone, even when that comfort zone is limitation. To dismiss ideas before fully exploring them because some quiet internal voice has already decided the outcome. Replacing that belief is not a matter of positive thinking, it's a matter of evidence. You build a new belief by taking small actions that produce small results, which produce slightly larger actions, which produce slightly larger results, and so on, until the evidence of your own capability becomes undeniable to your own mind.
The first investment you make, however small, matters not primarily for the financial return, but for what it tells you about yourself. The first budget you stick to matters not for the dollars saved, but for the identity it begins to build. You are becoming someone who manages money with intention. That identity, once established, changes everything that follows. As we close this chapter, carry this with you. Wealth is not a destination reserved for the fortunate few. It is a direction, one that becomes available the moment your thinking about money becomes more intentional than your conditioning about it. You cannot control where you start it. You can absolutely control the quality of thought you bring to where you're going. Start there. Everything else is built on that foundation.
Chapter 8. The Art of Influence. How strategic thinkers move people without manipulation. Power is a word that makes people uncomfortable, and that discomfort is worth examining. Because somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that wanting influence over others is suspicious, that the desire to persuade, to lead, to move people toward outcomes is inherently self-serving and therefore morally questionable. But here's what that teaching actually produced. It produced a generation of capable, intelligent, well-intentioned people who surrendered the field of influence to those with fewer scruples, who left the room while decisions were being made, who had brilliant ideas that never traveled beyond their own minds because they hadn't learned how to move those ideas through other people effectively. Influence is not manipulation, and the failure to understand that distinction has cost too many good people too much. This chapter is about reclaiming that distinction, about understanding influence at its deepest level, not as a set of tricks or tactics, but as a genuine human skill rooted in psychology, empathy, and strategic clarity. Because the most powerful influencers in history, the ones who moved people, shifted cultures, built movements, were not manipulators. They were masters of human understanding. And human understanding is something you can develop deliberately, starting now. Let's begin with the most fundamental principle of genuine influence. People do not act on logic alone. They act on emotion justified by logic. This is not a cynical observation. It's a neurological one. The emotional centers of the brain process experience faster than the rational centers. Emotion arrives first. It creates the orientation, then logic arrives to explain, justify, and defend the emotional position that's already been taken. What this means practically is that if you want to move someone, genuinely move them, not just get surface compliance, you need to address the emotional dimension of their experience before the logical one. Not to exploit it, to honor it. To demonstrate that you understand what they feel before you present what you think. This is why the most effective communicators always begin with empathy rather than argument. Not performed empathy, the kind that's scripted and obvious and actually creates distance. Genuine empathy, the kind that requires you to temporarily set aside your own perspective and genuinely inhabit theirs. To ask, what does this situation feel like from where they're standing? What are they afraid of? What do they want that they may not be saying directly? What past experience is shaping how they're hearing me right now? These questions are not soft, they are strategically precise. Because the person who understands what someone else is experiencing has an enormous advantage in every conversation, every negotiation, every attempt to create alignment. Let me introduce you to a man named Adrian. He was a project manager at a mid-sized company, technically excellent, deeply competent, perpetually frustrated. His ideas were good, genuinely good, but they kept dying in meetings. His proposals were rejected, his suggestions were overlooked. His managers seemed to favor colleagues whose work he privately considered inferior. For 2 years, he attributed this to politics, to favoritism, to a culture that didn't value merit. Then one evening, he had an honest conversation with a mentor who told him something that initially stung. Your ideas aren't the problem.
Your delivery is. You present information as if the quality of the argument should be sufficient, but you are presenting to humans, not computers. You need to understand what each person in that room needs to feel before they can hear what you're saying. Adrian spent the next 3 months studying the people around him, not their job titles or their opinions, their motivations. What did his manager care about most? Stability and not being surprised. What did the senior stakeholders value? Visibility and credit. What did his peers need? To feel included rather than overshadowed. Armed with that understanding, he began reshaping how he presented ideas. He addressed concerns before they were raised. He framed proposals in terms of what each key person valued most. He gave credit generously and made people feel like co-architects of ideas they'd merely been informed about. Within 6 months, his proposals were being approved. Within a year, he was being asked to lead them. Nothing about his ideas had changed. Everything about his understanding of people had. That story contains one of the most important insights in this entire book. The quality of your thinking is only as valuable as your ability to transmit it through other people. A brilliant idea that stays inside your head produces nothing. A good idea that travels through people, builds momentum, attracts resources, and gets implemented produces everything. The gap between those two outcomes is influence, and influence is learnable. Let's talk about the specific mechanics. The first is what I call the architecture of agreement. Before asking anyone for anything significant, a decision, a commitment, a change in behavior, build a foundation of small agreements first. Not manipulative micro-yeses designed to trap someone, genuine points of shared understanding that establish common ground. When people feel that you see the world similarly to them in important ways, their resistance to your perspective drops naturally. Conflict, in most cases, is not a disagreement on conclusions. It's a disagreement on premises. When you surface and align on shared premises first, the conclusion often becomes obvious to both parties simultaneously.
The second mechanic is the power of genuine curiosity. Most people enter conversations, especially high-stakes ones, with their argument already formed and their primary goal being to deliver it effectively. But the most influential communicators enter conversations with genuine questions. They want to understand before they persuade. And this approach is counterintuitively more effective at persuasion than any prepared argument, because it does something that arguments rarely do. It makes the other person feel genuinely heard. And people who feel heard are far more open to being moved than people who feel talked at. Try this the next time you're in a conversation where you need to influence an outcome. Before presenting your perspective, ask at least 3 genuine questions about theirs. Not rhetorical questions, not questions designed to expose flaws in their thinking. Real questions with real curiosity about their answers. Then listen. Actually listen, not just wait for your turn, and reflect back what you heard before offering your own view. The shift in the conversation's quality will be immediate and remarkable. People will open where they were previously closed. They will soften where they were previously defensive. Because you gave them something rare. You gave them the experience of being genuinely understood. The third mechanic is what I call framing mastery. Every piece of information can be presented through multiple frames, and the frame you choose determines how it's received almost independently of its content. The same salary offer framed as a starting point invites negotiation. Framed as our best offer, it creates finality. The same business risk framed as a potential downside creates fear. Framed as a defined and manageable constraint creates confidence. The same feedback framed as "here's what's wrong" creates defensiveness. Framed as "here's what I see possible for you" creates receptivity. You are always choosing a frame, consciously or not. The strategic communicator chooses deliberately, asking what frame makes this information most receivable for this specific person in this specific moment. Now, I want to address the distinction between influence and manipulation directly because it matters, and the line is worth drawing clearly.
Manipulation uses psychological mechanisms to move people toward outcomes that serve you at their expense. It exploits fear, insecurity, confusion, or cognitive bias to bypass someone's rational agency and produce compliance they would not freely choose with full information. Influence, as I'm describing it, is the opposite in its intent and its method. It moves people toward outcomes that are genuinely aligned with their own interests as well as yours. It gives people more information and clarity, not less. It respects their agency and their ability to say no. The test is simple. After the interaction, does the other person feel better informed, more respected, and more capable of making their own choice? Or do they feel pressured, confused, or somehow outmaneuvered? Influence leaves people feeling expanded. Manipulation leaves them feeling reduced. Build the first, never use the second. Let's talk about one of the most underestimated influence skills: timing. The same request made at the wrong moment fails where it would succeed at the right one. The same feedback delivered in the wrong emotional context creates damage where it would create growth. Strategic communicators develop an acute sensitivity to timing, to the emotional temperature of a conversation, to the readiness of a person to receive something, to the moment when resistance is low and openness is high. This sensitivity is built through attention, through watching people carefully, listening beneath what they say to what they mean, noticing when someone is stressed or open or defensive or ready. Most people are so focused on what they're going to say next that they completely miss this information. The person who notices it has an enormous advantage in every human interaction. There's one more element of influence I want to leave you with, and it may be the most powerful of all: consistency. The person who says what they mean and does what they say reliably over time accumulates a form of influence that no tactic or technique can replicate, because trust, once established, makes influence almost effortless. People follow those they trust without requiring extensive persuasion. They give benefit of the doubt. They open doors. They advocate on your behalf when you're not in the room. And trust is built in exactly the way we discussed in the chapter on reputation, in small moments, repeated consistently over time. Every kept promise is a deposit. Every dropped commitment is a withdrawal. The account of trust, built carefully over years, becomes the foundation from which all meaningful influence flows. As this chapter closes, I want to offer you a final reframe. Influence is not something you do to people. It is something you create with them. It is the product of genuine understanding meeting honest communication in the presence of real trust. Develop that combination and you will never need to manipulate anyone. You will simply need to show up fully, understand deeply, and communicate clearly. That is the art. And like all art, it rewards those who practice it with something that lasts long after the conversation ends.
There's a moment that happens for some people, not all, but some, where everything they've been learning quietly assembles itself into something coherent, where the separate pieces of understanding suddenly reveal themselves as parts of a single, unified picture, where thinking and decision-making and patience and influence and wealth and strategy stop feeling like separate subjects and start feeling like one integrated way of moving through the world. That moment is available to you right now, not as a distant destination, as a recognition of what you've already been building inside yourself through every chapter of this book and through every experience that brought you to it. We began with the mind before the move, with the foundational understanding that how you see reality determines what you do with it, that the gap between stimulus and response is where all strategic power lives, that perception is not passive, it is a skill, a practice, a daily act of intentional construction. Everything that followed was built on that foundation. The chess player's advantage showed you that time is not a flat surface, but a terrain, full of leverage points, early signals, and compound consequences that reward the thinker who looks further than the moment.
The architecture of decisions revealed that intelligence alone is not protection against poor choices, and that the structures, environments, and habits surrounding a decision matter as much as the decision itself. Leverage taught you that effort is not the primary currency of achievement. Placement is. That the same amount of energy, applied at the right angle, produces outcomes of an entirely different magnitude. Patience showed you that the silence between the notes is not absence, it is structure. That the seasons where nothing seems to be happening are often the seasons where everything essential is being built. Your inner board of directors gave you a way to carry wisdom beyond your own experience, to consult perspectives that expand your thinking and challenge the default voices that would keep you small. The Wealth Mindset chapter asked you to look beneath your financial behavior to the beliefs driving it, and to begin replacing inherited limitations with examined, chosen orientations toward abundance. And Influence showed you that the quality of your thinking is only as powerful as your ability to move it through other people, with empathy, with clarity, with the kind of trust that accumulates slowly and operates permanently. These are not 8 separate ideas, they are 8 dimensions of one idea. That idea is this: a strategic life is a designed life, not controlled, designed. There is a crucial difference. Control is the illusion that you can manage every variable, prevent every setback, and guarantee every outcome. Design is the practice of building a system of thinking, habits, and relationships sturdy enough that when the uncontrollable arrives, and it always does, you navigate it from a position of clarity and strength rather than confusion and reaction. The strategic thinker does not expect life to be predictable. They expect themselves to be capable, and that expectation, held consistently, becomes self-fulfilling. Now I want to talk about what happens after a book ends, because this is the moment that separates the people who transform from the people who were temporarily inspired. Inspiration is not rare, it's everywhere. Books, podcasts, conversations, moments of clarity in the shower at 2 in the morning. Inspiration arrives regularly for most people. What is rare is the translation of inspiration into structure, into daily practice, into decisions made differently this week than they were made last week. That translation is the real work, and it begins not with a grand plan, but with a single, honest question. What is the one thing I understood in this book that I have not yet applied to my actual life? Not the most interesting concept, not the most intellectually satisfying insight. The one thing you understood that you have been, until now, not quite living. That's your entry point. That's where the real work begins. Because transformation doesn't happen through the accumulation of more knowledge. It happens through the consistent application of what you already know, deepened over time through honest reflection and course correction. Let me say something about the journey ahead that I want you to carry carefully. It will not be linear. Progress in the development of a strategic mind does not look like a clean upward curve. It looks like a series of advances, plateaus, unexpected setbacks, and sudden leaps forward that make the plateaus retroactively meaningful. You will have weeks where your thinking feels sharp, and your decisions feel sound, and momentum feels real. And you will have weeks where old patterns resurface, where reactive thinking overrides intentional thinking, where patience collapses under pressure, where you make a decision you know you'll have to learn from. Both kinds of weeks are part of the same process. The setback weeks are not interruptions of your progress. They are where the deepest learning happens, where the gap between who you've been and who you're becoming becomes most visible and most workable. What I want you to build above all else is not a perfect strategic mind. That doesn't exist. What I want you to build is a resilient one, a mind that recovers quickly from its own errors, that learns efficiently from its own experience, that holds its direction even when the conditions are difficult, that remains curious about its own patterns rather than defensive about them. Resilience in thinking is not stubbornness. It is the combination of clear direction and genuine flexibility, knowing where you're going while remaining open to adjusting how you get there based on what you actually encounter along the way. There's something I want to address directly before we close: the question of comparison. You will encounter people who seem further ahead, who appear to have figured things out faster, built more, achieved more visible success at a younger age. Some of them will genuinely have done so. Others will be presenting a version of their story that omits the years of invisible struggle, the failed attempts, the quiet crises that preceded the visible wins. Either way, their timeline is not your timeline. Their architecture is not your architecture. The strategic life is not a race with a shared finish line. It is a deeply individual design process, one that honors your specific starting point, your specific values, your specific combination of strengths and blind spots, and builds toward a future that is genuinely yours rather than a replica of someone else's highlight reel.
I want to speak now, not as a strategist, but simply as someone who has walked a long road of intentional growth and wants to be honest with you about what it actually requires. It requires courage, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, the quiet, daily kind. The courage to make a different decision than you made yesterday. The courage to be honest about a pattern that isn't serving you. The courage to invest in your own development when the return is invisible and the cost is immediate. The courage to hold your direction when people around you don't understand it and can't yet see what you're building. That courage is not optional. It is the load-bearing wall of everything else discussed in this book. Strategy without courage is just theory. With it, strategy becomes life. I also want to acknowledge something that ambitious people rarely give themselves permission to acknowledge. The path is allowed to be enjoyable. Growth is not required to be painful. Learning is not required to be grueling. The development of a strategic mind can happen inside a life that is rich with pleasure, connection, beauty, and joy. In fact, it works better that way. Because a life that is only about achievement and optimization becomes brittle. It lacks the depth and humanity that makes strategy meaningful rather than merely mechanical. Build ambitiously, but also build a life you genuinely want to be inside of. Those two things are not in conflict. They are designed to coexist. As we arrive at the final pages of this book, I want to offer you something more personal than a framework. I want to offer you a genuine acknowledgement. You chose to be here. In a world full of distraction, noise, and easy entertainment, you chose to spend your time thinking more carefully about how to live, how to decide, how to grow. That choice is not trivial. It is, in fact, one of the highest leverage decisions a person can make, because the return on investing in your own mind compounds in every direction simultaneously, in your finances, your relationships, your career, your inner life, your capacity to contribute to the people and communities around you. You came to this book with something already inside you. Ambition, yes, but more than that, a genuine desire to understand. To not just succeed, but to understand why certain approaches to life produce flourishing and others produce stagnation. That desire is the rarest and most valuable asset you possess. Protect it, feed it. Never let the busyness of achievement crowd out the curiosity that makes achievement meaningful. So here is what I want to say to you plainly and from a place of genuine respect. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, which is the most finite and valuable resource you have. Thank you for your willingness to sit with uncomfortable questions and honest reflections rather than seeking only validation. Thank you for taking seriously the idea that your thinking can be improved, your decisions can be strengthened, and your life can be more intentionally designed than it has been. That openness is not something everyone brings to this kind of work. You brought it, and it will serve you enormously. You have everything you need to begin, not to finish. Beginning is what matters now.
The finish will arrive in its own time through the accumulation of beginnings made with intention and followed through with consistency. Begin with your thinking. Begin with one decision made more carefully than you would have made it before reading this book. Begin with one conversation approached with more empathy and strategic clarity. Begin with one financial choice that reflects a wealth mindset rather than a scarcity reflex. Begin with one act of patience where impulse would have previously won. Begin there, and then begin again tomorrow. The life you were built for is not waiting somewhere ahead of you like a destination you haven't reached yet. It is being constructed right now in the quality of your thinking, the integrity of your decisions, and the consistency of your effort. You are already building it. Keep going. The world genuinely needs people who think well, act with intention, and lead with clarity and humanity. That is who you are becoming, and I have every confidence that you will. Subscribe to the Millionaire Library, and if you want to go deeper, I left a full playlist waiting for you in the description.